Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mayan Johnson, Housing Program Manager at SCAG, and welcome to the RHNA Reform Information and Input session. There were a lot of people who signed up for today's session, so let's just give it one more minute as everyone comes back from lunch and ready to learn about RHNA and provide input. Thanks for your patience. Well, all right, we have a lot of participants already logging on. So I want to welcome everyone for coming to SCAG's RHNA Reform Information and Input session. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Mayan Johnson, Housing Program Manager from SCAG. We do have a packed agenda today, so I want to make sure that we start and end on time. So with that, for our welcome, I'd like to introduce Kome Ejise, our Executive Director, to provide some opening and welcome remarks. Kome?
Thanks, Mayan, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SCAG's RHNA Reform Information and Input session. Glad to have you all here. I see we have quite many people joined already, and they're still joining. But we'll get going, and hopefully we'll get through the agenda today. The RHNA process is a very important one for us in determining housing needs across the region. And by statute, SCAG is recognized as the regional agency that handles that responsibility for the 6-county area. We can see from the many people that have signed up that this is a challenging process and one that folks want to chime in on. We completed the 6th cycle RHNA in March of 2020, and as of last week, late June, fewer than 20 jurisdictions in our region have adopted compliant housing elements, which is an indication of the challenge that has been around the whole RHNA process. We acknowledge the challenge, and many jurisdictions are facing this all through their planning process in trying to meet up to the RHNA requirements. While there are a lot of ways to reform the housing element and zoning laws of California, we're here today to focus exclusively on the RHNA process and how we determine how much housing each jurisdiction needs to plan for. The sixth cycle process, for us at SCAG, during that process, we received well over 500 written comments and countless verbal comments all through the process. It was a 2-year process, and stakeholders across the region provided feedback on housing needs, and we heard a lot of input on how to reform RHNA even then. Our efforts today is to really collect all that input and hopefully engage with stakeholders today as part of a process that we expect will line up and synchronize with the statewide effort that's underway to reform RHNA anyway. I'm glad to see this level of participation. I think it bodes well for the capacity we should bring to the table as the large region that we are in helping the state reshape the RHNA process. We won't be able to pursue all of the input, obviously, but I can tell you that at SCAG, we're committed to make sure that we'll review all comments on ways to improve RHNA, and we will be making recommendations to our board sometime later in the year, and might be even early next year, to the extent that we have more need to open up the process for more input. And hopefully you'll all be staying tuned with us as we go through that process of bringing all of your input to the board, and hopefully the board will adopt some recommendations that will forward to the state. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to share your thoughts today and taking the time to join us, because we know this is important to you and we want to treat it with the same level of importance. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mayan, and she'll guide you through the rest of the day. Mayan?
Great, thank you, Kome. And yeah, again, welcome everyone to the RHNA Reform Information and Input session. Today's agenda, we do have a packed agenda, and let's see. So first, we'll start off with an information session. It has been a while since many of you have talked about RHNA outside of your housing elements. We completed the RHNA process last year, as Kome mentioned. So I'll be giving some information about the efforts of RHNA reform, both SCAG's RHNA reform and statewide. And then I'll give an overview of the SCAG 6th RHNA cycle and then provide some overview of the recent state RHNA audit. We'll have a brief Q&A session about RHNA, the information that was provided. And then the heart of today's agenda is the input session, because this is a start of SCAG's effort for RHNA reform. So what we'll do, there are a lot of people who signed up today, and we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for everyone to at least participate in a discussion or listen in. So we'll have 4 breakout groups by different topics, and you can select which topic you'd like to start off with. And then every 15 minutes, we encourage you to select another RHNA topic. So each room will have a facilitator and note taker, and then we will report out on the topic areas. So you can still stay in the rooms, but we do encourage you to go to other rooms so you can hear other perspectives and talk about other things on RHNA. So after the report out, we'll go into next steps and then we'll wrap up today's session. So with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation. So for RHNA reform, during the 6th cycle, a number of issues were raised by jurisdictions and stakeholders. So these things dealt with the calculation of the regional determination, factors used to determine housing distribution, that's our methodology, the role of Connect SoCal, our regional plan and household projections, and a lot more. So during this time and afterwards, SCAG is committed to review these issues and facilitate conversations with the state, Hcd, to reform the RHNA process. Meanwhile, there's also state efforts for RHNA reform. AB 101 in 2019 requires that Hcd, it's the California Department of Housing and Community Development, develop a recommended improved RHNA allocation process and methodology that promotes and streamlines housing development and substantially addresses California's housing shortage. It includes a requirement for statewide stakeholder participation, but it is limited to the RHNA process, specifically in Government Code 65584 through 65584.2. While we do acknowledge that there are a lot of challenges faced by local jurisdictions in developing their housing elements and rezoning, this process is limited to RHNA, the RHNA process and the allocation. So there is a statewide requirement to look at RHNA reform, and they have to submit a report to the state legislator by December 31st, 2023. I did want to point out that SB 197, which was just enacted last week, extended the deadline, which was originally at the end of 2022 this year, to 2023. So SCAG does want to synchronize with Hcd's efforts. We did set this up before the enactment of SB 197, but we want to continue that momentum to look at ways to reform RHNA. So today we have our public information and input session, and then later this month we'll also have presentations to our SCAG Housing Working Group and the Technical Working Group. And of course we'll accept written comments on RHNA reform. Please submit those by August 12th, just so we can look at them all together. And then sometime next year, we'll be developing recommendations based on all the input that we've collected, and then we'll be bringing that back to our policy committees, our Community Economic and Human Development Committee, and our Regional Council for recommendation and action. And what we want to do is take these approved recommendations on RHNA reform and submit that to Hcd as our SCAG comment letter on how we can revamp the RHNA process to meet housing needs both regionally and statewide. And so we'll hope that Hcd can take these, will facilitate conversations, but we want them to include our comments and recommendations into their final report to the state, which is due next year. So going into the 6th RHNA cycle. So for those unfamiliar with RHNA, or you have already forgotten what RHNA is a state housing law requirement to determine existing and projected housing needs for every jurisdiction in the state. It's an 8-year planning period, and this RHNA allocation goes into a local housing element, which is part of the general plan. So a RHNA allocation are housing units, housing need for a jurisdiction for its 8-year planning period. So every jurisdiction has to then update its housing element to show through sites and analysis where housing is planned for, or where housing is needed. It's not a building quota. It is what is a requirement for jurisdictions to plan for in the housing element. Every COG, Council of Governments, such as SCAG, is on a different cycle throughout the state. So SCAG's 5th cycle RHNA covered the planning period 2013 to 2021, and the 6th cycle, the one we are currently in for housing elements, covers 2021 through 2029. So there's 5 main objectives outlined in state housing law. So what we have to do for the RHNA allocation plan, and everything we do for RHNA, has to further these following objectives. First is to increase housing type, supply, tenure, and affordability within each region in an equitable manner. We also have to promote infill development and socioeconomic equity, protect environmental and ag resources, and encourage the efficient development patterns. We also have to promote an improved intra-regional relationship between jobs and housing. And then number 4, allocating a lower proportion of housing needed income categories for jurisdictions. This is to prevent over-concentration of income groups throughout the region. So to make sure that every jurisdiction does its fair share and we're not just giving more of the same. And then the last one, affirmatively furthering fair housing, AFFH. This one is new for the 6th cycle, but in a nutshell, this promotes and encourages access to fair housing for historically marginalized and disadvantaged groups. So all of these objectives need to be furthered for all the activities, whether it's the methodology for RHNA or the allocation plan. We have to further all of these objectives. So the 6th RHNA timeline. So this is the process that we looked at, and this is generally a process that each COG has to follow. So we start off with the Hcd Regional Determination. This is given by Hcd in consultation with each Council of Governments and the Department of Finance. So for SCAG, as one of the main factors that we use to help provide information to Hcd was part of our local input process, also now known as the local data exchange. But we took households, different types of factors, and provided them to Hcd. And it's up to Hcd to give that regional determination to SCAG and each COG. So once we had that regional determination,
Montgomery, Alabama. Come on,
so once we had
family, for some tables, chairs,
You niggas.
So once we had that Hcd regional determination, each COG is then responsible for developing the regional methodology. Every COG can decide what they want in this methodology, and each methodology can be developed, each COG can be different, and it can differ by each cycle. So the methodology is applied to the regional determination, and then you have the draft RHNA allocation for every individual jurisdiction. So these then, this then starts the appeals process. So jurisdictions and Hcd can appeal a RHNA number. And then once that's concluded, you'll have the final RHNA allocation. After that point, jurisdictions update their housing elements, and those were due in October of last year. So for the RHNA cycle and the RHNA reform process, what we're trying to do, we're looking at the process up until the final RHNA allocation. So just to make that clear, what we want to look at for reform right now is anything from the regional determination all the way through the adoption of the final RHNA. And again, we can look at the housing element requirements, rezoning after this process, because we do acknowledge that there are a lot of issues that were brought up by different jurisdictions and stakeholders. So for the regional determination, so it's up to Hcd to provide that determination for each COG, and it can differ by each cycle. So the 6th cycle was about 1.34 million units needed for the region, and you can see that was much higher than the 5th cycle and the 4th cycle. So delving in then to the determination and what's in it, because there's an opportunity today to provide your input on the calculation and how it was calculated for from Hcd. So just quickly looking at the 5th cycle and 6th cycle, I'm just going to provide a high-level overview. I'm not going to get too technical, but starting with existing and projected households, that's the top line, and you can see how they got to the regional determination. But I want to point out not just what's in it, but how it's calculated. So there were a few new things for the 6th cycle. So that's overcrowding and cost-burdened households. Those were added to the 6th cycle, but something such as replacement need. So this is usually a fixed percentage. It's for units that are lost due to fire or they were demolished for various reasons, but they do need to be replaced to keep up with projected household growth. So usually it's a fixed percentage that's at 0.5%, but you can see the 5th cycle, it was applied to existing and projected households after projected households was, or sorry, existing households was removed. So 0.5% of 468,000 is about 2,400. For the 6th cycle, replacement need was also about 0.5%, but rather than being applied to a smaller number, it was applied to both existing and projected households. So you can see it's about 34,000. So even though it's the same percentage, how it was applied made a difference. How these factors applied made a difference on the 6th cycle and has some explanation on why the number is so much higher. And again, at the end of the day, Hcd does make the final determination to give to each COG. So each COG provides these different factors to each COG, but again, it's up to Hcd to provide that determination as specified in state housing law. So then going into the methodology, and again, I'm just going to provide a high-level overview just to go over what's in our methodology, so you can include that in your discussions and input. So the 6th cycle RHNA methodology was based on each jurisdiction's share of projected household growth, job accessibility. So this is basically access to jobs within a 30-minute drive commute for every jurisdiction, their share of that for the region, transit accessibility, so accessibility to high quality transit areas, that was also a factor, and then also a social equity adjustment. And again, this is to further the 4th and 5th objectives of ensuring that every jurisdiction does their fair share and also increases access to fair housing. So these 4 main factors were the primary drivers of determining an individual allocation from the 6th cycle 1.34 million units. So just as a comparison for the 5th RHNA cycle, the primary determinants were the share of household growth and a social equity adjustment. So job accessibility and transit accessibility were not included. So each methodology can include different factors, and it's up to the COG to decide that. And then as part of the process, Hcd does review and provide comments, but it's the COG that adopts it and then applies that to the regional determination. So just as a quick illustration, what this did for the 6th cycle, the methodology, this is looking at job access, job accessibility for jurisdictions. It drove a lot of the housing need or determined housing need in more infill urbanized areas, whereas the outlining areas have less job accessibility compared to where the red and orange are in this map. So that's why our plan, a lot of the distribution concentrates it more in, for example, Los Angeles and Orange counties on this map. So now going into the appeals process, any jurisdiction and Hcd could appeal a draft RHNA allocation. And all appeals were reviewed by a RHNA appeals board that was it's a RHNA subcommittee that's part of our CHD policy committee. And each appeal received a public hearing. So 52 appeals were filed on 49 jurisdictions. Most asked for a reduction in their RHNA allocation, but a few asked for an increase for a jurisdiction. And so each appeal had its own public hearing. We had about 50 of them in about 3 weeks. It was a very intensive process, but only 2 appeals of these were granted, totaling about 3,100 units. And there's a list of factors that then could be the basis for appeals. There's a limited number of factors, but all granted appeals require redistribution of units proportionally back to the SCAG region. And the reason for this is that the RHNA allocation that's given at the beginning of the process, 1.3 million, has to be the same RHNA allocation for the region at the end of the process. So if there are reductions in RHNA for draft RHNA, those have to be reallocated back to the region. So there's a basis for RHNA appeals, namely there's an application of the RHNA methodology. There's also planning opportunities and constraints, including things such as existing and projected jobs and housing relationship, water sewer service, rate of overcrowding. There's a whole list that we are required to survey in our methodology and looking at that at the regional level. And during the appeals process, a jurisdiction can appeal and ask for a reduction or an increase based on these factors. AFFH is another basis and change of circumstance. And again, the full listing is in state housing law. I did want to point out state housing law also states an appeal cannot be based on any local ordinance, for example, a moratorium that limits residential development. You cannot cite a prior underproduction of housing from previous RHNA or stable population numbers. So these are specifically stated in state housing law. So after the RHNA process, at the end of the RHNA process, after the appeals have concluded, we adopt a RHNA that was done in March 2021, and then included the redistribution of those appealed units that were successful. Housing elements were due in October, and as of earlier July, 19 jurisdictions have an adopted compliant housing element. But I did want to point out that the rezoning deadlines have been adjusted so for now SB 197. So this is allowing jurisdictions who have an adopted compliant housing element by October this year will have up to February 2025 to complete those required rezonings. So just wanted to let everyone know for housing element rezoning, there is some extension for those who meet compliance and adoption by October. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to go over the RHNA audit. So there was a state RHNA audit. This was requested by the California State Joint Legislative Audit Committee, and the state auditor examined HCD's regional determination process. So it was just limited to the regional determination. 3 regions were reviewed: Santa Barbara Association of Governments, SCAG in Sacramento, and Amador County. And the report was published earlier this year. The SCAG region was not included in this. And so the findings, while I'll go over a quick overview of the findings, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a conclusion for SCAG's number or our process, but I just wanted to share some of the findings from the audit. So the key findings, I did want to point out the auditor did not look at actual numbers and say whether those numbers themselves were accurate or correct, but rather they reviewed the process and how HCD derived those numbers and how they came up with the regional determination for those 3 areas. So the conclusion is that HCD had made several errors regarding calculations and doesn't have a sufficient management review process, that they didn't just demonstrate consistency and work group recommendations prior to this regarding several factors, such as job housing balance and housing destroyed during a state of emergency, and that there was an inconsistent application of comparable regions as required by statute. So again, it didn't say the numbers were wrong, but rather it looked at the processes and made these conclusions. So some of the recommendations it made were for the state legislators, some clarification on the application of the healthy market vacancy rate and the determination, and for HCD to do things with its process, such as instituting a staff data review, establishing a process to document all required factors, and perform additional analysis justifying why they use certain factors over others. So again, these weren't about the numbers themselves, but rather the process. So what we'd want to do today, and I go to Q&A soon, but I just want to provide a quick overview of what we're going to do, is going into 4 different topic areas: regional determination in room 1. Room 2 is methodology and distribution. Room 3 is about appeals, and room 4 are about other topics that these don't cover. So we'll be dividing them into separate rooms, and then we encourage you every 15 minutes to go to a different room. So with that, I'd like to go over into Q&A, and again, this isn't about comments, but more just if you have questions, if you can raise your hand, because I know we have a lot of people online. If you're on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand, but that way we can make sure your questions are answered, your technical questions, before we break out into each of the rooms. All right, I see Jeremy Levine.
Hi, Jeremy, Bay Area resident in Contra Costa. Just curious, you brought up the HCD audit. Did the audit find that HCD under or over calculated the RHNA number?
Yeah, so it did look at just those 3 areas, and it did conclude that for one of the COGs, it did undercount based on one of the factors and based on the data it had used to determine that determination. So we can't really say whether or not it undercounted or overcounted for each of those, or that it can be applied to every COG in the state, such as SCAG, but rather it just found that the process was in error, so it could have resulted in a lower number for at least one of those areas that it studied.
So you're saying that based on the process that HCD used, they undercounted the RHNA in one area, is what we know now. That's all the information we have.
Yes, just based on the audit. And for those who do want to look at the audit, we do have a link on the SCAG website for the RHNA page, www.scag.ca.gov/RHNA. It has a link to the full audit report if you wanted to look at that. And I did also want to point out that this presentation is online right now on the same page. So that way, if you wanted to look at it or refer to it during your input sessions, you're welcome to take a look. I don't see other raised hands. I thought I originally did, but is everyone ready to talk about RHNA? All right. Well, with that, so if you scroll down or go down to the bottom where you can see participants chat, share screen, record, live transcript, and breakout rooms. So click on breakout rooms and you can go ahead and select which breakout room you want to join. Again, room 1 is the regional determination process. Room 2 is the methodology and distribution. Room 3 is an appeals process, and room 4 are other topics. So we will see you back here in an hour. So make sure every 15 minutes, join in your room, and we'll see you back here in an hour. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am in, hopefully you found the right room, room 2 for RHNA methodology and distribution. We'll wait for a couple more people to file in. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names, so I may call on you. We want to keep this conversation going for at least 15 minutes while you're here and through the whole hour. So I may call on you to get that conversation to keep it going. So don't be shy. Feel like a talk show host. And I think they're officially starting the 15-minute timer for convenience at 1:30. But yeah, feel free to chime in at any time. All right, so let me bring up my screen. I do have some discussion questions. Hopefully you picked the right room.
Mayan, I believe you're still in the main room.
Oh geez, I'm sorry. I thought, I thought I hit join. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Thank you, Jen.
I am struggling to try to figure out how to join one of the breakout rooms. Is there anybody on who can help?
Yes, hello. This is Jennifer. I can help.
Okay, because I'm on my
Um,
phone.
Oh,
So
unfortunately, if you're on your phone, I don't think I can move you. Let me check. Paulina, is that correct?
that is correct, yes.
Did you want regional determination, methodology and distribution, or appeals, or other?
Appeals, please.
Okay, here you go.
Hi, I was on methodology and all of a sudden I'm back in the main room.
Okay, I'll send you back to
Thank
methodology.
you.
Hi, this is Jessica. I was trying to join room 2, and I could
Okay.
see it on my screen, but I am also connected through my.
I didn't even let her finish. I mean, I didn't mean to cut her off. I just-
Hey, Jennifer, good work. Looks like the sessions are going well. I've jumped across all 4 sessions a few times.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Right now, I wanted to thank everyone for participating in the input session. Hopefully, you learned a lot from your different colleagues across the region and outside the region. Time seems to fly when you're among friends, and at least in my room, we had an engaging discussion. Let's see. I know we said 2:35, but I know everyone has emails they probably want to get to or a coffee to go make. So we're going to get right back into this. All right, so topic area report out. So I know some people hung out in the same room the whole time, but others decided to check out other topics. So we're going to ask the facilitators of each room to just kind of give a recap, different recommendations, different types of input, what they've heard. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it to you for the regional determination.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming and jamming in the regional determination room. Kevin Kane, program manager for demographics and growth visioning here at SCAG, worked on a number of parts of the sixth cycle RHNA, including the determination. There was a really wide range and very flowing discussion. So again, thanks for that. If I were to try to characterize and pull out, a few themes that we heard kind of repeatedly, the one that came out that struck me the most is that, well, these are, the goals in the sixth cycle are definitely different. Some people characterize them as impossible, others characterize them as visionary. 1.3 million is definitely different than anything we've really seen in history over a comparable 8-year period in the past. So it's very aspirational. Some other folks also characterized it as punitive. Some had concerns over the interlocking other pieces of state housing law, notably AB 1398, which does not allow you to reuse a RHNA site over a certain number of cycles. And if there's going to be an issue with that, if we continue to have these kind of visionary or maybe impossible goals. A second factor that was discussed is the notion that perhaps an expert panel of some sort would have some benefit to have perhaps a little bit of oversight on some of the HCD approaches and methodology. Certainly something that was referenced in the auditor's report, but also it could, it could help to make it a little bit more of an open and public process, at least to a degree, although these are fairly wonky technical issues, in terms of how you calculate a vacancy rate between renter and owner and over what time period and all that. I'll close with two other smaller factors that did come up. Climate and natural lands conservation were mentioned at a couple of points, I think, throughout the discussion. One that, climate change and resiliency is not necessarily too much of a factor, in pushing urban expansion into areas that are more susceptible to, say, extreme heat, but also the kind of the planning requirement that, even if there are areas that are kind of off limits to development, you still may have to figure out a way as a jurisdiction to find some places of density that are not so impeded. And then the final thing that came up at a couple of points is this almost tiny little thing from past cycles, in that the regional determination used to be a range. It wasn't a wide range, but it did allow a little bit of flexibility during the appeals stage. And because the process does take a heck of a long time from start to finish, that something like that could, a small tweak back to that could be helpful again. So that's how I'd characterize the regional determination, but sorry if I missed the great discussion and points that you all contributed.
Of course, I'm on mute. Thanks, Kevin. It sounds like you had a very engaging discussion in room 1. All right, so I headed breakout room number 2, the methodology and distribution. We had a lot of people attend throughout the hour, and I'm glad to hear too that there are people from outside the SCAG region who also had input for the RHNA process, both for SCAG and statewide. So some of our major takeaways included having SCAG consider the existing cost of housing, such as rents, market rents, as a factor in the demand for housing. And again, just as a reminder, the regional methodology is no matter what the number is, how that should be distributed across the SCAG region. Other considerations were to consider aging infrastructure and the cost of development with the need to upgrade this infrastructure as part of determining each jurisdiction's housing need and what the distribution is across the region. There was also some comments about the focus of affordability of built units and that more guidance is needed from the state. And a couple of people also commented on transit access. For point of reference, the SCAG methodology for the 6th cycle looked at transit access, but using 2045 figures from our Connect SoCal plan. And so some of the comments were that while there should be weight on transit accessibility, looking at a shorter range rather than a long-term range. So more towards the Rena cycle itself, that 8-year planning period. And also focus growth on cities that have light rail, looking at transit growth in the short term. And then there's considering limitations of jurisdictions with very high wildfire severity zones. Some jurisdictions are obviously, they do have open space, but that needs to be more defined. And a limiting factor should be the consideration of wildfire. And a lot of these two considerations, some of the commenters noted, should be actually in state housing law and not just up to each COG to decide that. And then also to consider vacant office space and remote employee market, especially due to COVID in the past couple of years, and how that relates to job housing balance. And then also some clarification on state housing law, consistency with the development pattern of the Connect SoCal plan. That is a requirement that the RHNA methodology needs to be consistent with that, but it doesn't give any specifics beyond that. So maybe some more definition or clarification in state housing law so that there is agreement on what that exactly means. So we had a very engaging discussion, and yeah, I want to thank everyone who participated in room 2. All right, appeals, Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to all that joined room 3 on a great conversation surrounding appeals. We had a lot of feedback from both local jurisdictions and residents. A lot of local jurisdictions expressed some frustrations with the 6th cycle RHNA appeals process. Some felt that they did not have enough time during the actual appeals hearings. And given the number of appeals, a lot of the local jurisdictions felt that some of the board members could have been burnt out given the long hours. So some suggested creating 2 different or multiple boards so that the same folks are not the ones listening to all of the appeals. They would have also liked to have worked with staff beforehand so that some of the technical issues could have been could have been dealt with outside of the public hour. And they also felt that there were some inconsistencies in the level of analysis between the different jurisdictions, given various staff members working on different staff reports. So some local jurisdictions also suggested that they would like the board to have a little bit more flexibility in decision making. A lot of their decisions were constrained by statute, and say they would like to see the appeals board be able to use their judgment in the appeals process. Also, a lot of greater consideration for wildfire and safety hazards during the appeals. They want to be able to see more appeals be granted when it comes to safety issues. And a lot of residents also expressed that they appreciated the appeals process as it is. Some suggested issuing penalties for jurisdictions that appeal. And there is also concern with how the units for the successful appeals were given back to other jurisdictions. There was suggestions of having some units kind of put on hold so that they don't get redistributed when there is a successful appeal. And a lot of people just noted that there wasn't much wrong with the appeals process as it is. It's just that the RHNA number was simply too high this cycle, and therefore appeals were more popular than usual. So that was kind of the general feedback that we received, and we appreciate everyone that came out to give us their opinions. You're on mute.
Thank you, Karen. All right, David and Lyle, you were in the room number 4.
Thank you, Mayan, and thank you everyone who joined us in room number 4, which was other. We kind of broached 3 main topic areas. The first one being sub-regional delegation. We had a bit of discussion on this, and people's opinions sort of fell into 2 main camps. The first being that it was an opportunity for jurisdictions to have a more nuanced methodology to assign RHNA units amongst themselves. But overall, there was the feeling that it was quite unnecessary, a lot of effort, and there were also concerns about, the power dynamics between, say, jurisdictions within the sub-regional delegation. Would there be instances where, some jurisdictions might not take their fair share of their RHNA allocation? So there are concerns about that process. So overall, I think there was general agreement that, following the broader SCAG methodology would be a more prudent approach to that. So that's our main thoughts about sub-regional delegation. And then the next topic we discussed was trade and transfer of RHNA units. Lyle, did you want to get started on that?
Yeah, so we brought to the attention that, in previous RHNA cycles, trade and transfer were allowed between certain jurisdictions, and should it be allowed during this type of during future cycles? And from the most part, it was a little bit of a mixed bag of feedback. A lot of folks were fairly against it, as they feared that this was just a way that, some of the wealthier communities could potentially, just transfer out their RHNA numbers to other communities. That was a pretty big takeaway. But then another component of it was, if folks did kind of support this idea of trade and transfer, they were pretty stringent on making sure that there are well-defined parameters, whether that being, they could only transfer, say, market rate units and not low-income units, or what have you. So that was kind of the big takeaway from the trade and transfer component of ours. And then the last section of our room, we covered, what are the thoughts on the length of the RHNA planning process? Is 8 years too short for both projection and planning periods? And this was probably our least talked about area in our group. And for the most part, folks were pretty indifferent. They said, housing elements are updated, during this same cycle for the most part, so that they were not really supportive of changing the length of a RHNA cycle itself. So, but that was the key takeaways from our group. I don't know if David has any additional thoughts on it.
Just that the 8-year planning process seemed flexible enough to respond to changes. So that was, pretty much their thoughts on that point.
Great. Thanks, David and Lyle, and thanks to our facilitators for the recap. And I did see a question really quickly pop up too. This session is being recorded, and I believe we also recorded the breakout sessions. But at least for the main session without the breakout rooms, I believe we'll have a link available. We do have to process the video, and we'll be posting it. We will probably post it around late in the next coming weeks. I don't want to give a date because AV staff will not be happy with me, but we do want to make sure you do have access if you did miss anything, and then SCAG staff will be reviewing all of the notes. So this brings us now to towards the end.
Mayan?
Yes.
Sorry, there was also a question about the slides from the rooms.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Lyle. So yes, the presentation that's up right now is just the main presentation I gave, but we can also just post the questions that were posed in each of the rooms. We'll post that as well on the RHNA website. So we are just starting our RHNA reform process. So this is not the only opportunity to participate, provide input, and listen to the input from others. If you'd like to submit a written letter to SCAG, we can accept them through August 12th, just so we can review them together. You can always submit it at any time, but we just ask you probably do it by mid-August, so we can make sure we review it with others as well. So you can send them to housing@scag.ca.gov. We'll also also be presenting at the Housing Working Group meeting on July 19th and the Technical Working Group on July 21st. So all of these input and recommendations, any feedback that you've provided us, SCAG staff, we will review all of them. And then we'll start to look at possible recommendations in this coming year based on the input that we've received. So we'll be reviewing that throughout the year, and then sometime next year, because we want to make sure it coincides with Hcd's process, that we'll be developing recommendations and taking them to our CEHD committee and our regional council, and so that way we can then get approval to then write the comment letter to Hcd and also facilitate conversations based on these approved actions. So the report is due next year to the state, so it won't be happening this year, but that does give us time to actually look at recommendations and recommend something meaningful to for our region. So this actually brings us to the end of the agenda. We actually ended early, but before we disperse, I did also want to make sure if there's any questions anyone had about the process. I don't see any raised hands or any chat boxes pop up. So with that, oh, I see Michael Barnes.
Yeah, is there a way for us to provide you more written comments? Will that be available on your website? I'm sure there is. I just want to confirm that.
So you can submit a letter to housing@scag.ca.gov. Thanks, Michael, for bringing that up. So yeah, if you'd like to submit a written comment, please send it to housing@scag.ca.gov. All right. Well, everyone, we have finished a little early. The website is www.scag.ca.gov/RHNA. We'll post all the information you need, presentations and other materials, and also schedule updates to that the little calendar on RHNA reform on that webpage. We'll also send out an email to all participants just recapping today. And I see a hand, Layla?
Yes, I was just wondering about the housing working group meeting and the technical working group meetings coming up. Will those kind of have the same format as today, or?
Yes, slightly, just because those meetings have their own agendas. So for the housing working group, it is open to the public, but we do have other items on the agenda. So we will have about 1 hour dedicated to this. So it'll be similar in that there'll be information, and it'll be more of an open style rather than breakout rooms. And then technical working group, because they do get into more details. And I believe there's a roster for that, though people can come and just observe. But that'll get into more technical details, such as actual vacancy rates, what's appropriate for the regional termination, rather than just focus on process and be more broad. So that one's a little more focused than what we had today. And I believe there's only about 30 minutes set aside, so it's definitely not as large as today.
Okay, and like, so will the outcomes of or the feedback from all of like today and those meetings and the written feedback, that'll kind of all get compiled together?
Yes, we'll be looking at them all together.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so you don't have to participate in every single one. We will, when you provided input today, we definitely have that in our notes.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Great. Right, and then Mary Rushfield. All right.
Quick question. How are you bound to the comments we make, or are you at all?
Yeah.
What is the accountability here?
Sure. So SCAG staff, we are reviewing all of the comments received, and we will be making recommendations to our CEHD committee and regional council. And we will include a summary of all the comments received so that anyone, the public, jurisdiction, a stakeholder, decision maker, can review all the comments received and bring them up as well. SCAG staff, we will use our professional, try to use our professional expertise in reviewing the recommendations and creating them. But we will, in the interest of fairness and transparency, we'll still post comments received so that those can be also reviewed alongside the recommendations. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we will end a little early today. And again, I appreciate, thank you everyone for attending and providing your feedback. And we will send out a quick email after this to provide a link to important links to resources. And again, you can send me your comment letters to housing@scag.ca.gov. So thank you everyone again for coming today, and have a great afternoon.